When it comes to X86 handhelds, there are two different kind of handhelds that you can get. The Neo Air currently dominates the ultra portables. If you're looking for something that can fit in your pocket, a lot of people have been going for this unit here. These joysticks are not the most comfortable and they're pretty recessed into the device. This is very similar to what we see in a lot of ARM devices. When it comes to these smaller devices, we actually do have to make some compromises on the cooling capacity of them. Battery life on these units also suffers slightly. However, if you do want some better ergonomics and some better battery life, as well as some better joysticks, the only other option that we've been looking at recently are large handhelds. Jumping up from there is the Steam Deck. This thing is a colossal handheld, and it doesn't make any compromises in terms of ergonomics and joystick quality. We have full-size joysticks. We can put these caps on them as well to add some extra height. But this thing is huge. You do get some really nice ergonomics on these big units, and the cooling is pretty decent as well. But they're definitely not portable. So the question today becomes, is there a good mix between something like the Steam Deck? What if we could take the power of the Steam Deck with its benefits like full-size joysticks and some decent ergonomics, and mix it with the portability of the Neo Air? Well, there is actually one handheld that can do just that. I recently looked at the Loki Zero and I was pretty impressed. But as far as AAA gaming goes and high-end emulation, it just wasn't up to the task. What if we could take the power of the Steam Deck and put it into that shell? Well, we can do just that. This is the Loki Max, and I think it is the perfect balance of portability versus power. I want to see today if this is a good balance between these two units, being portable while having some decent performance as well. Just a fair disclaimer as well, this was sent to me by the company. They're not seeing this review before it goes up. All opinions are my own, and of course they're not paying me for this review. My Loki Max comes with 16 gigs of RAM, 512 gigs of storage, and I got the black one. We're going to look at upgrading this storage down the road in an upgrade guide for this unit, so make sure to stay subscribed so you don't miss that. I also did the same thing on the Loki Zero. I'll leave that video linked in the description below if you're interested in checking that out. This unit is going to be a little different though, as it's running a different processor, so there are a couple other tweaks that we can check out on this as well. Whether you're in the market for a good smaller portable Steam Deck, I think you're going to be pretty impressed with the Loki Max. Did AYN just create the perfect competition for the Steam Deck? Let's open this up and take a closer look at this unit to find out. As of currently recording this video, there is no case that comes with the Loki Max anymore. If you're looking at grabbing the Loki Max, you are going to have to grab a case with it. However, with the Loki Max, we do get a USB cable. We also get a power brick. These are the specs of the charger here. And the build quality is excellent. This is the same charger that comes with the Loki Zero and the Odin 2. This charger is also a perfect square, coming in at 68 by 68 millimeters, and it's 32.2 millimeters thick. Inside the box, we get a little pamphlet here. There's also a tempered screen protector thrown in there. In that envelope, we also have an overlay of the console, as well as the commands for the different modes. It also shows us our shortcuts. We also have our keyboard and mouse shortcuts down here at the bottom. Under that is just the console itself. This is actually the second Loki Max that I have gotten from AYN. The first one had to go back as there was a small scratch here, and there was also a scuff on the left side of the screen. As soon as I showed that to AYN, they happily replaced the unit, so they seem to have pretty good customer service. When I had issues on the speakers with my Odin Lite, they did send me out some replacement speakers pretty quick, so the customer service definitely seems to be there. Before we take a closer look at the console, I do want to get that screen protector on there, so I'm going to go do that quick and I'll be right back. In terms of pricing at the current moment, the Loki Max goes for $550 US, and you can get it in black or white. Looks like currently the white models are back ordered for 2 to 3 weeks, but you can get the black models and they do seem to be shipping these out relatively quickly. One of my friends recently ordered the black model and he saw his ship the next day, so they definitely seem to have some of these in stock. For $550 US, you are getting a 6800U. This is a pretty capable processor, and overall it's not too bad. The 6800U is an 8-core, 16-thread processor that can boost upwards of 4.7 GHz. It has a max temperature of 95 degrees and is based on 6nm technology, so it's pretty efficient. The 6800U also uses the 680M integrated graphics. This thing has a base clock of 2 GHz and can boost up to 2.2. In terms of raw GPU power, we're sitting at 3.68 teraflops. To put this into perspective, if we're looking at the Steam Deck is half that at 1.6 teraflops. Now, teraflops is obviously not going to be a one-to-one comparison, and you can't really base performance off that alone, but having double is obviously going to be a huge jump. It's also worth noting as well that the Steam Deck also has a significantly weaker CPU that can only go up to 3.5 GHz, so if your games are more CPU oriented, the CPU on the 6800U, once you get the wattage up a little higher, is going to definitely be beneficial. We're sitting at 12 GPU compute units, whereas on the Steam Deck we're only sitting at 8. We also have 16 gigs of LPDDR5 memory at 6400 MHz. The Steam Deck OLED is also rated for 6400 MHz. We do have a slightly smaller battery than the Steam Deck OLED, only at 46.2 watt-hours. We also have USB 4 on this unit and Wi-Fi 6E, which is really awesome. Wi-Fi 6E is better connectivity than the original Steam Deck, but the OLED Steam Deck does have that Wi-Fi 6E as well. Good thing about using the 6800U is driver availability. With the 6800U, as it's a laptop processor, it's pretty easy to get the drivers for it. We do also have some customizable RGB lights on that, and I think that looks pretty sweet. We also have stereo speakers and a 6-inch 1080p screen. At $550 US, it's matching the Steam Deck OLED. The Steam Deck is definitely an interesting unit, but they're so close in price, I want to see how far apart these two are. The only place to get this currently is the AYN official website. I'll leave a link in the description below if you're interested in checking one of these out. Let's take a closer look at the unit itself though, and see how it stacks up to the other X86 handhelds that I currently own. First impressions are pretty good, and the build quality is excellent. This is the exact same shell that they have on the Loki Zero, so I've used this before. Unfortunately, when putting that screen protector on, I did get something under the corner here. Either that or I damaged the edge of the screen protector. But the important thing is that the screen is protected, and that's on there. I do definitely recommend checking out the video in the description below to get that screen protector on good. Aside from that though, I think I did a pretty decent job. It's not too heavy, but you do definitely feel some weight to it. Because this is a smaller handheld than the Steam Deck, it does feel more dense. They did do a very good job at balancing this out though, and the weight is pretty distributed evenly. If we move the Loki Max right over to the edge, you're gonna see, yeah, this is way smaller than the Steam Deck. If we put it in the center here, the trackpads on the Steam Deck really add a lot of width to the sides. But the screen size is pretty different on these two units as well. Let's first take a look at how thick these units are. Both of them, as their X86 handhelds, have to have pretty decent cooling systems in them. If we're looking at the Steam Deck LCD, we're coming in at 20.4. However, on the Loki Max, we're coming in at 23.5. The grips on the Steam Deck are pretty awesome, and you can definitely get a lot more gaming in with the grips like this on a handheld. The thickest part on the Steam Deck grips comes in at 36.6mm. The Loki Max is almost matching this at about 35.5. We can also measure the joystick height on these units. As you can see, the Loki Max comes in at 8.9mm. This is kind of hard to show, but if you look closely, I'm only measuring the part that comes out of the Steam Deck, and it also comes out to 8.9mm. So if you're looking at joystick height specifically, these two units are neck and neck. On the Aya Neo Air, we're only sitting at 4.6mm. If we're looking at shooters and stuff, this is definitely not a joystick that I want to be using. As far as the ROG Ally goes, these ones come in at 7.5 millimeters. If we're looking at handheld size specifically, this unit is definitely right in the middle between the Aya Neo Air and the Steam Deck itself. The Steam Deck being significantly larger, and the Aya Neo Air being ever so slightly smaller. These devices are also quite different in weight. I'll leave the weights for these three units on the screens of the devices themselves. As far as the build quality goes, it's pretty decent. This is a very smooth plastic, and it feels very similar to the Odin 2. In a climate that barely has any humidity, this is pretty good for fingerprints. Even my Loki Zero still looks pretty good. This is my Loki Zero, and you can see the plastic is holding up pretty well. If I tilt it into my lights ever so slightly, you are going to see where my fingers have been resting. I did also try cleaning this up a little bit, but that's just how the plastic is looking now. It's not too bad, and you're not going to really notice it. And it does have to be under certain light for you to see that. But even if I try cleaning it up, that's just how matte plastic is. I do kind of wish they went with a smooth plastic over this soft one here. The soft texture does feel really nice, but you're going to attract a little bit more fingerprints that way. Regardless, it's still pretty nice. And for matte plastic, this is definitely the best I've seen. The Steam Deck also does get some fingerprints, so no black device is safe. It's not too bad, but I do think that this texture that they have on the Steam Deck here is a little bit better for fingerprints. Regardless, I'm pretty picky with this kind of stuff, and the fingerprints on the Loki units haven't been bothering me. First up, let's take a closer look at these joysticks. These joysticks are not Hall-based, but they're still really decent. There is some resistance to them, and they're not very loose. This is definitely a good balance between joystick stiffness and being too loose. The ROG Ally, on the other hand, has some pretty loose joysticks. These are also not Hall-based. Both of these devices have concave caps on them as well, and soft rubber tops. One thing you might notice about the Loki unit as well is there's no anti-friction ring. You do have this little LED ring around the joystick itself, which kind of does act as an anti-friction ring, but it still does rub on the side of the joystick. If you're worried about the joystick stem wearing down, I'll leave a link in the description below to some joystick protectors that seem to work well with this. The joystick cap as well is really easy to replace, so I'm not too worried about it on my unit. You can swap these out for Xbox caps, and they work pretty good in there. I also showed that off in my Loki Zero Ultra video, the upgrade guide for the Loki Zero. One thing that's really nice about these joysticks though is that you get full range of motion. First-person shooters and racing games are going to be able to take full advantage of this nice joystick. These are also the same caps that are found on the King Kong Pro 2 controller, and I actually replaced these with silver in my Loki Zero. The width of these joysticks comes in at 16.3 millimeters. The Steam Deck ones are slightly smaller at 15.8. As far as face buttons, they've gone for a full rubber membrane kit. These are pretty nice buttons overall. I think they went for a really good balance here on the size of these face buttons. These are a lot bigger than the ones on the Aya Neo Air. They're also not loose, which is really good to see, but there's enough space between them that they're not going to rub on the sides and wear down. I'm also glad that they went for the Xbox style layout. These are some pretty nice face buttons, and they're not too loud either, and we'll take a closer look at the sound of these in a couple minutes. As far as the bumpers go, you definitely want to press them anywhere from about here down. It seems like the hinge is up here at the top. You can push it from there, but it's definitely a little stiffer. It does get more loose the further you go away. These are also really soft to click. This is kind of how I like the bumpers on my devices. The bumpers on the King Kong Pro 2 controller are pretty loud and they can get kind of distracting in games. Another thing that they did right on this unit is these triggers. You have a lot of travel range, but you don't have too much. The triggers on the Aya Neo Air devices almost have too much. That's really good in racing games. In first-person shooters, you do want a shorter travel length. This is roughly the perfect distance for what I like to see in a handheld. We don't have too much travel distance, but we have enough, so it's still really good for racing games. These triggers also feel really smooth as you're pushing down. You do hear a noise though as you bottom them out. but it's not too distracting and it's about the same as what you would see on the Ioneo Air. That hasn't bothered me on the Loki Zero, and it hasn't bothered me on the Ioneo Air either. If we look at it from the side, you can see that travel length a little better. You're getting some pretty good travel distance on those triggers, but not too much. While we're checking out buttons as well, let me show you what these sound like, and I'll show you what these bumpers sound like as well. I'll also show you what these face buttons sound like. Alright, let's hop into a sound test. As far as the ergonomics go on this device, they're really good. We have some very chunky grips on the back. The device is also pretty thick here, and that helps with gripping it as well. I do also like when grips do this, but this one swoops into the middle. This makes it a lot easier to grab onto it. We also see this on other devices like the Ioneo Air and the Steam Deck as well. This grip here is bigger than the one on the Ioneo Air, but not quite as big as the one on the Steam Deck. Regardless, this is a pretty nice grip. We also have that RGB light going down the side as well. Now we get to turn on the unit, and this is probably my favorite part of the device review. We get to see what the unit is like when we first power it up. When you turn it on, you're going to notice these RGB lights come on, and it's going to boot you right into the Windows setup. Before we get into the device setup, I did want to also note that this D-pad is pretty clicky, but I really do like it. The D-pad has a little bit of wobble, but it's pretty good. It has a subtle click to it. It's also rounded on the outsides. It sounds very similar to the face buttons. Now that we've powered it on though, it's just your standard Windows setup. Let me show you how to set this up. I am going to connect this to my capture card so it's a little bit easier to see. Alright, so I've connected it to my capture card here. The first thing we need to do is to select our language. Then just go ahead and select your country. Once you've selected your country, it's going to ask you for your keyboard. Just go ahead and select your keyboard layout. It is going to ask you to connect to your Wi-Fi here, but I don't recommend connecting to your Wi-Fi here, so you can create an offline account. With a handheld, I do recommend creating a local account. So instead of selecting our Wi-Fi, we're just going to say, I don't have internet. Continue with a limited setup. Then just go ahead and enter your username. Select no to all of Microsoft's stuff, and only send the required diagnostic data to Microsoft. Just keep selecting no through all Microsoft stuff here. Once that's done, it's going to do a quick setup on Windows itself, then it's going to boot us in. This should only take a second, and we should be into our Windows. With that done, we finally booted into Windows, and we have our start menu up here. The first thing that I like to do is to move the start menu back to where it's supposed to belong. Just right click on the taskbar, go to your taskbar settings. I also like to uncheck this stuff. Scroll down to the bottom to taskbar behaviors, then select left. Once you've selected left, go ahead and close that. The next thing that you want to do is to connect your device to the internet. Go ahead and turn your Wi-Fi on and connect to your Wi-Fi. With your Wi-Fi connected, load up your internet. You might also notice that your Loki fan is picked up like mine, so you definitely want to open up the Loki Control Center first. If this shows up, just click yes. I'll show you how to disable that in a second. Yeah, so the fan is at 100% at 57 degrees, and it's set to manual at 100%. I'm not sure why it's defaulted to that, but you definitely want to fix that. Let's go to auto, and that's a lot quieter. If you press the bottom right button on your Loki, it'll bring this up and down. Heading back to the internet, go to ninite.com. This is going to let you batch install all the apps that you want on your device in one go. So I want Chrome and Firefox. I'm going to get Discord on there as well. I'm going to load VLC, my antivirus, 7-zip, and Steam. Double check the list here to make sure you didn't miss anything, but once you've got all your stuff, scroll down to the bottom and click Get Your Nanite. Then click on the install file that pops up in your downloads. This is going to start the install process. Go ahead and select yes. This is going to download all the apps and install them one by one. And with another internet browser on there, sees the last of Microsoft Edge. Let's minimize this. While that's minimized, click on the start button, go to all apps, Then we're going to scroll down this list and remove anything that we don't want. Not all of this can be removed, but a lot of this is just Microsoft's bloat, and you can take it off pretty easy. Clipchamp is one that you definitely want to take off, so right click that and uninstall. This is of course just personal preference at this point, so just go down here and remove whatever you don't want. With that still installing, let's do a couple extra tweaks. Click on the folder down here, click on this PC, right click on your hard drive, go down to properties, then uncheck the allow files on this drive to have contents indexed. So this is going to shut off indexing on the device. Go ahead and click continue and ignore all. This is going to take a good while, but once this is done, this won't be running in the background. We're essentially trying to limit what's running in the background of Windows so our games run a little quicker. And on that note, my fan just picked up again. If you find this a little loud, let's just set this to manual. I'm going to set this to 60% just for the time being, but we're going to watch these temperatures as we're doing this. Leave your indexing files going in the background, then right click on this PC here and go to properties. Let's rename this PC quick. I'm going to call this Loki Max. Once I type that in, just click next. Now it'll show up correctly on your network. You're going to go through these options here and change a few things, but the first thing that I like to do is to head to the personalization tab, then go to the colors, and I'm going to change that to dark mode. I'm also going to choose a nice accent color. Next, check to make sure that your time zone is set correctly. There we go, so I've set that correctly. Next, go to the gaming tab, go to the Xbox game bar and shut that off. We're going to use the Steam Big Picture as our primary interface for this device, basically our front end for all our games. If you shut this off, you're going to be able to use the bottom left button to pull up the Steam menu. This way it's going to feel exactly like a Steam Deck, and that's what we're aiming for. Go to the graphic option here, change default graphic settings, and make sure to turn this on. You're going to get slightly better FPS by turning that on. Next, go to your privacy options, and you might have to scroll down and check all of these, but just make sure that you shut all this off. Make sure to shut off this feedback frequency because it gets pretty annoying. Go down to the bottom and go to System Update, then check for updates. There's going to be a lot of updates here, so you're going to have to get these all done. I do recommend doing this before installing or playing any games. Just go ahead and download and install all. This is going to do things like install your updated drivers and all the Windows updates that you're going to need. It's also installing our USB driver, so that's good. It's updating our Bluetooth driver, our Wi-Fi driver. So let's just let this finish. In the meantime, we can load up Steam and sign into it. Let's start up Steam, let it download its update, and we'll log in there. I'm just going to scan this with my phone to let me log in, and we're into Steam. First thing you want to do in Steam is to go to Settings. In the Interface option menu in Steam, make sure that Steam is set to run when your computer starts, and also make sure that Steam is set to launch in Big Picture. If you have a different front end that you plan on using, you don't have to check this. That's about all that I recommend setting in Steam, but you can do a couple other things as well. If you prefer to have less graphical improvements on the navigation in Steam itself, you can turn on low performance mode here. Since we're using the 6800U though, you don't have to do this. Under your download options, make sure to uncheck throttle downloads while streaming. I also don't like to transfer game files over a local network, as this can generally use a lot of CPU power on the device that's sending the files. That usually ends up being my editing rig, which is my main computer, and I'm usually using it at the time, so I do want to shut that off. Make sure that cloud saves are on. That's about all we have to change in the Steam settings. One thing I'm noticing is everything seems very responsive. We do have to optimize our system startup next, so in the startup menu, go ahead and type msconfig, then go check your services menu and check hide all Microsoft services. This is all my antivirus. We have Steam, we have Google here for Google updates, this will leave that. You have your Wi-Fi and your AMD stuff, so there's no services starting up with the computer that shouldn't be. Check the startup tab and open up the task manager. In the startup apps, just go down here and disable everything except for Steam. your antivirus, and any driver-based software. While we're getting updates in the background, we can also update the graphics driver. Head over to Google and search for AMD graphics driver. Click on the top one here and just go ahead and download Windows drivers right here. This is going to automatically check which one we're going to need. Click on that and it'll open it up. Just say yes, install, let it install. It should only take a second. We can close our browser down and just let this install. This is first going to check which hardware we have in our computer, then give us the correct driver. Once it's figured out what we need, it's going to have this menu here. You're just going to want to make sure to install the recommended driver. Select Don't Allow AMD to Collect Information and go Next. It's also going to skip this next part, so just go ahead and click Install. Once you move this over to the center of your screen, just leave all 4 of these checked. These are your other drivers that you're going to be needing. Just go ahead and click Install. Then it's just going to go ahead and install all the drivers that we're going to need. We're waiting for the updates of Windows anyways, so let's let this do this as well. Speaking of which, you can take a look at the updates and they're progressing pretty good. We're almost done. There's just a couple here left. While we're waiting for those drivers to install, we can also shut off those notifications that keep popping up once we're installing something new. Type in msconfig, go to your tools, and change user account control settings. So launch that up and set to never notify. Then just click yes, and this is the last time that you're going to see this message. Once the driver update is finished, you're going to want to uncheck this box here, and you're going to have to restart your system. You're also going to have to wait for those updates to finalize, as now it's going to install them. After all those updates are finished, it's going to come back and it's going to log into your Steam. If you press the bottom left button, since we've shut off that Xbox menu, it is going to come up with the side options here. From there, we can actually shut down Steam just for the time being. I've also gone ahead and installed a couple games here, which we can try out in a bit. The next thing that I do want to get set up is the RTSS. This lets us limit our frames in games. To do this, head to the internet browser. From there, search up RTSS, click the first link that shows up, scroll down and download the final version. Right-click on the folder and extract all. Then just go ahead and set up RTSS using the installer file there. As soon as we install it, you still see that it's not showing as installed. That's because we have to start it up first. Make sure to set RTS to start with Windows, turn that on, then just minimize that. Now when we enable the frame limiter, it should say that it's enabled. In the start menu, search for Advanced and click this top one here, the Advanced System Settings. Then go over to the Remote tab and uncheck this and click Apply. Then go to System Protection, click on your C drive here and go to Configure. I find that this System Restore never works and it uses a lot of disk space, so I like to disable this. In the Advanced System Properties, go to the Advanced tab, then click on the Performance one here. Select Custom and uncheck everything above the shadows. Shadows under Windows and everything below you want to keep checked, but everything above, just go ahead and unselect that. Then click Apply. Then go to the Advanced tab in that. On most machines that run Windows, you want to have some amount of virtual memory unless you're running 32 gigs or more, so we're going to leave this set to automatic. Windows will adjust this as needed, but for now, it's only using 2.5 gigs for virtual memory. If we open up the AMD Adrenalin software, there's a few things that you want to change in here. Click on the Performance tab and go to Tuning. Then for the Memory Optimizer, make sure you change that from Productivity down to Gaming. In the Gaming tab, scroll down and click on Display. Then scroll down from there. You're going to see something called Very Bright. For me personally, I don't really notice this adjusting my backlight on my display, but some people are very perceptive to backlight flickering. If you notice that your display is getting darker or brighter just automatically by itself, you can go ahead and disable this. But for me personally, I haven't noticed anything, so I'm going to leave that on, as that does help with the battery life. I do like to set the color temperature to 6500 Kelvin, as this is going to be the most accurate. You can also turn down the brightness ever so slightly if you want a little bit better black levels, but I do find it really good already. The only thing that I also would recommend doing is maybe bumping up the saturation ever so slightly, but you don't want to go very far because this is already a really good panel. I find about 115 to 120 is usually ideal. So once you have those settings, you're good to go. If you don't want the saturation adjustment, you can leave that off. At the bare minimum though, I do recommend setting that color temperature to 6500 Kelvin. It is going to make the color look a lot more accurate. From there, you can go back to the Home tab and check for updates, making sure that you have the latest AMD Adrenalin software. If that's already been updated, just go ahead and close that. Let's give that internal SSD a benchmark quick. To check the internal SSD, I'm going to use a tool called SSD Benchmark. I'm going to use a 1GB file. You can see here that the SSD manufacturer is Bywin, so this is the same manufacturer that we saw on the Loki Zero drive. Immediately, you can see the writes jump to 2.3 gigs per second and the reads jump to about 2.2.5. This is actually a pretty decent drive. And if you're interested to see how your hard drive compares, at the very end of this test, it's going to give us a score that you can compare it to your hard drive with. The test finished with 1497 for reads and 1401 score for writes, bringing the grand total to 3684 for the entire drive. That's not bad at all, and I'm pretty impressed with the hard drive. I'm going to do a quick test on a microSD card that should be anywhere between 80 to 90 writes and anywhere from 80 to 90 reads. This should give us a good solid baseline to make sure that that microSD card reader is working correctly. So the sequential test finished here and we got 82 writes and 94 megabyte reads, so that is functioning correctly. The microSD card reader in the Loki Max definitely seems to work well. The next thing that I want to do is to do a quick boot test. Let's see how quick this thing powers up now that we have Windows configured and installed, and we have a few games on there as well. Let's give it a try. Overall, that's actually not too bad at all. This is slightly slower than the ROG Ally, but the hard drive that I have in my ROG Ally is a little quicker, so that's to be expected. All in all, that was pretty decent. As you can see as well, because we've configured Steam to boot when we first start up Windows, you don't even see the Windows interface, and that's a good thing. Because we've disabled the Xbox game menu as mentioned, we can just pull up the menu bar from here. You can also pull up the sidebar by pressing this and A. So this is effectively a Steam Deck, but we still have that Windows functionality if we need it down the road. The cool thing about these Windows handhelds is you can actually use these as a full desktop computer. So you can take it with you on the go when you're at work, play some games on it, and when you get home, you can connect it to a dock, and you're good to go. I do know someone that uses one of these handhelds as their full-time computer, and I think that's pretty cool. I could probably do it as well, but as I use it for rendering, I do need that extra GPU power, so I rely on my 3080 for that. Let's check out the speakers next. We have dual front-facing speakers here, and they're pretty good. They are not going to be as good as the ROG Ally or the Steam Deck, but as far as other handhelds go that are about this portable, they are definitely better speakers. As far as where these sit, I would say they're better than the Neo Air devices, and they're probably just behind the original LCD Steam Deck. But let me show you what these sound like, and I'll let you judge it for yourself. If I'm looking at these in person, not on film, they actually sound a lot better. The Loki Max has pretty good speakers, but they're lacking a little bass. Aside from that though, they're pretty dang good. You can use EQ software to boost that a little bit better, and they do end up sounding a little bit better overall because of it. However, these speakers cannot match the Steam Deck with bass. I don't think you're going to be disappointed with the speakers on this unit. I tested the input latency on this controller and we got some results here. So we're looking at around 8 milliseconds latency with a polling rate of 125. This is pretty typical for most controllers, and that's the same results that we got on the Loki Zero. I also want to see if I can overclock this to see what kind of results we can get. So let's give that a try and we'll check out the results. As far as overclocking the controller to get better input latency, you're sitting at around 2.58 milliseconds with a polling rate of 400 Hz basically. This is exactly the same result that I got on the Loki Zero, so they're probably using the same controller boards. If you're interested in learning how to overclock the controller on your Windows handhelds, I'll leave a link to that in the description below. This effectively makes the controller feel much more responsive, and you're going to notice a lot shorter input latency between your reactions in games. This is going to help a lot on first-person shooters and action platformers, as well as a whole host of other games. If you're sensitive to input latency, make sure you check that out. You can definitely see a screen quality difference between the original Steam Deck LCD and the Loki Max. To make matters worse, I've also put a matte screen protector on my Steam Deck when I got it, and I definitely want to replace this. But you can see the color differences here. The blues don't look as saturated, yellows are completely washed out. All in all, the colors are way more rich and vibrant on the Loki Max. All I've done with the Loki Max is set the color temperature to 6500 Kelvin. I've also set the Steam Deck with the latest update to 6500 Kelvin as well, but you can definitely see the color differences between these two. To me anyways, the Steam Deck colors just don't look as vibrant as the ones on the Loki Max. But yeah, compared to the Steam Deck LCD, the Loki Max definitely wins. Let's bump up this screen to something with a little bit better panel and see how it stacks up to the Loki Max. One thing that Ayaneo has always done is put really good screens on their handhelds, and even the Air Plus here that was only $250 has a better panel than the Loki Max. The colors are far more saturated, but what I'm noticing the most here is the brightness difference. The Air Plus is definitely way brighter, and I do love that in a panel. I would say that's probably so far the biggest letdown on the Loki Max is the screen brightness. This is with both devices turned to their absolute max brightness, but you can definitely see a difference here. The colors are really good on both though, and they're very accurate. The greens look very green, the blues look really good on both, and the yellow's not washed out on either. The black levels are also really good, and there's no detail washout on either device. The only thing I think the Air Plus has going for it in this case is the brightness, and I do really like a bright panel. Between both of these devices though, I would have to pick the Air Plus for screen quality. Me personally, I just like a bright panel, and this one definitely calls to me more than the Loki Max, but this is not a bad panel by any means. Let's jump up panel quality and take a closer look at something else. Next up is the original Air Pro. This one has an OLED panel, and I did find this one quite dark. I do think that the Air Pro here is slightly brighter, but they're very close. All in all, these are both really decent screens, and they're very close in color saturation. Out of all the devices that I own, these two devices are probably the closest. I do think that the Air Pro is slightly brighter, but they're really close. At least to my eyes. What do you guys think between the Air Pro and the Loki Max? Which color do you prefer? Let me know in the comments below. So far it's looking like the Air Pro has the most similar screen to the Loki Max, but let's try another one. It sounds like the Switch OLED is going to be the closest comparison to the new OLED Steam Deck. And as you can see here, both of these screens are pretty good. I do think that the colors are looking a little bit better on the Switch OLED, but they're still pretty decent on both. You are getting way more saturation on the Switch OLED compared to the Loki Max. Colors do look accurate on both though, and the brightness is decent on both. Looking really close here, I think that the Switch OLED might be a tad brighter, but it's really close. What do you guys think? Which one's brighter to you? Either way, both of these panels look really good. I think the Switch OLED color temperature is slightly on the warmer side. Let's try one more device to see how it stacks up to the Loki Max. The last device that I wanted to compare to the Loki Max was my current favorite, and that would be the ROG Ally. The ROG Ally does have a brighter screen, and you can definitely see that between these two. Color temperature is also slightly different on the ROG Ally. The blues look very vibrant on both, greens look really good, and yellows very saturated. I am noticing better black levels though on the Loki Max. The ROG Ally does have a much brighter screen though. For me personally, as mentioned, I really just like a bright screen, and as long as the colors look very vibrant and saturated, I'm happy. I think both of these screens are really good, and I really don't have anything negative to say about them. Colors look fine on both, so I'm happy either way. For the performance testing, I'm going to be turning down the TDP to the lowest it needs to go for each of these games. On games like Sonic Mania, we can go as low as 6 watts, and this game is running absolutely flawlessly, so you can get some good battery life out of something like this. We'll go over battery life a bit later, but so far it's pretty good to see some games running as low as 6 watts. In Sea of Stars at 1080p with the default options, I also have the game set to 8 watts, and it's running flawlessly at 60 FPS. This is one of my favorite games from the past year, and I definitely recommend checking this one out if you haven't already. This seems like a really great processor if you want to run some low wattages. I set the TDP even lower to 6 watts and it's still running flawlessly at 60 FPS with 1080p. I'm very impressed with this console so far. Even Skul the Hero Slayer at 1080p usually requires a little bit more TDP in general, but I'm able to run this at 7 watts, getting flawless 60 FPS. It occasionally dips down to 59, so I would probably bump that up to 8 or 9 watt TDP, but for the most part, this is absolutely playable. If you haven't already and you like roguelikes, make sure to check out this game. But if you're looking to play some 2D games like this, you can definitely get away with under 8 watts. I could probably play this for anywhere from 160 to 200 minutes on a full charge. Moving over to Hades, I've set VSync on in full screen at 1080p, and I'm also using 10 watts, and this is playing absolutely flawlessly. I've actually been getting into this game a little bit more lately, and I've been having a lot of fun with it. It's incredible to see this game run at 10 watts. I've been really impressed with the efficiency of this processor. I've been able to turn these down quite a bit, and they're still running at a flawless 60. But if you're looking for 2D games or indies in general, I think you're going to be really impressed with the Loki Max. Moving things over to Stray, I've set it to borderless 1080p at 70% resolution scaling with a 60 FPS cap. I've also shut off motion blur, effects are set to medium, texture quality is set to high, and it seems to be running really well. Once the area loads in here, you can see, yeah, we're getting 60 FPS. If you look up at the top, the GPU is maxing out though, so you do need to run this at a higher TDP. I've set this to 18 watts, and it is dipping ever so slightly down to 45, so you might have to turn this up or cap your FPS to 40 or 50. Well, now that the area is loaded in, it's actually not too bad. You do want a little bit of a buffer on the GPU, and since it's maxing it out, we probably should turn up the TDP. This can go up to 2.2 GHz, but it is fluctuating, so it's trying its best to save electricity. The first time I played through this game, I actually beat the entire game on the Steam Deck, and it was running roughly anywhere from 40 to 50 FPS depending on the area. Sometimes it would dip down to 30, but this is a pretty light area, so once you get into the city, further in the game, it might dip a little bit more. For Persona 5 Royal, I set the resolution to 1080p, full screen, and I turned on VSync. We are having some frame time issues though, so we might be able to fix that by shutting off VSync. I also turned on the FPS limiter in the Loki Control Center, and this seems to have smoothed out the experience. I set it to 21 watts, but it is auto-adjusting itself down to 17. We're getting around 52 FPS at 21 watts, so we might have to bump this up ever so slightly to get some better frame rates. Regardless though, you're probably not going to notice 5 to 8 FPS, so this is pretty playable at what it already set to. If you set it to 720p, you can turn the resolution scaling up to 125, and you can bump these up as well, and that's looking a lot better. If I was to be playing this game on this device, I'd probably set it to 720p. I'm also not sure why the frame time looks like this, but I think it's just has to do with this game. If you're looking to play this game on the Loki Max though, I think you're going to be pretty happy. I still need to get back to playing this at some point, as I stopped a while ago and I haven't gotten back into it. But let's see what other games run on the Loki Max. In control, I'm using full screen. I set the resolution to 1080p with the rendering resolution to 720p. VSync is on. Then all I did was set to the medium preset. I scrolled down here, unchecked SSAO, and I shut off motion blur. And with all that, we're getting around 55 to 60 FPS. This feels actually really solid and it looks amazing on this screen. I think this is one of the games that actually surprised me the most. I did not expect to see Control running at 60 FPS on this device. We are using 23 watts to get there though, but it does seem to be extremely playable. I'm also not noticing any extra heat on my hands, which is really nice, but we can take a closer look at thermals later. Even if I'm throwing stuff here, the FPS is still not dipping very much. And my power saver mode has actually kicked on, so I gotta charge this thing up before we check anything else. You can also turn the TDP way higher, but your battery life is gonna take a pretty significant hit, so it really depends what you're looking to play. Now that we've talked about the performance on this unit, we need to talk about the elephant in the room, and that's the fan noise and the thermals itself. This unit only has one heat pipe and one fan, so that one fan does have to work overtime to keep the unit cool. By default, when you're getting that TDP up pretty high, you're going to see upwards of 70 degrees Celsius, which is still better than what the Steam Deck is getting, but regardless though, you can see, yeah, it is getting a little warm, and it is also quite loud. I've set the fan curve to manual, and I've also set it pretty low. I don't recommend doing this, but I'm just doing it for a worst case scenario, just to show you what kind of thermals we're looking at. We're sitting at 72 degrees, 73 right now, so it's definitely getting a little warm, but it's really quiet. However, the temperature on the grips is only getting up to 26 degrees Celsius, which is pretty good. For my American friends, that's about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. This is still very playable, and you're not going to find that uncomfortable. Flipping over to the back of the unit, let's take a look at the temperatures on the back of the grips. If we're looking at the temperatures on the back here, where our hands are sitting, we're looking at around 27 degrees Celsius. Maybe 28 if you're looking at more of the inside part here. That's around 87 degrees Fahrenheit. In the center of the unit, we're looking at around 37 or 101 Fahrenheit. And the other grip as well is sitting at around 28 to 29 degrees Celsius, or 83 degrees Fahrenheit. Looks like it jumps up to about 85 in certain parts, but for the most part, under 30 degrees is still relatively comfortable. The exhaust is obviously going to be the hottest part of the entire unit, and the exhaust is going to be sitting at around 40 degrees Celsius, or at around 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Even with this custom fan running for a while now, it's not going over 75 degrees Celsius, so the chip is doing a good job of keeping itself cool, even at 28 watts. I'm not going to shine a laser on the screen to get a temperature reading, as that's a surefire way to damage the display. The display itself is quite warm, but I don't think this is damaging the display at any means. Displays can get pretty hot, but this is actually not too bad, all things considered. This is also running significantly cooler than the display on my Neo Air. That thing gets really hot, and it's an OLED, so that's definitely more worrisome. This, however, does seem to be running pretty decent. I do think that the fan noise is definitely the biggest drawback of this device, alongside battery life. If you're interested at seeing what the fan sounds like, so this is the worst case scenario where you're running high TDP at 28 watts. The temperatures are currently sitting at anywhere from 71 to 74 degrees Celsius. But let me show you what this sounds like first, so you get a good representation of the worst case scenario. This fan curve isn't perfect, so I don't feel like sharing it, as it's definitely getting a little warm at around 85 degrees Celsius. This will start to throttle at around 90, I believe. So I do want to see if I can find a good medium for this, and if I do, I'll share it in the comments below. If you find a good fan curve for the Loki Max, make sure to let me know in the comments below as well. I am going to try to take a look at voltages to see if we can offset any of this heat in any way, just to see if that'll help at all. Automatic fan curve is a little loud for me, and I do notice the fan noise. I do like a whisper quiet device. The ROG Ally definitely is better in that regards compared to the Loki Max, but this device is quieter than the Steam Deck. If you look at the Steam Deck with the updated fan curve though, the Steam Deck is definitely quieter. As you can also tell, once you get the TDP up pretty high, you're going to get some pretty bad battery life. However, this is pretty typical across most X86 handhelds, so let's take a closer look at the battery life next. Battery life on the Loki Max is pretty decent, especially at the lower TDPs. Games like Sea of Stars only require 6 watts TDP at 1080p to run, and you're looking at roughly 4.5 hours of battery life. This is really good, especially for indie gaming. Bumping up to 10 watts on Hades brought the battery life down to about 2 hours. This is not the best battery life. The OLED Steam Deck is definitely going to have better battery life in that department. I do think 2 hours is not ideal, and we should be seeing anywhere from 3 to 3.5 on Hades. That would be pretty nice to see. Next up was Stray, and I think this kind of graphical tier of games is kind of where this device shines. I had to set the TDP to 18 watts, the graphics were at 1080p with 70% resolution scaling and medium graphics. This saw about an hour and a half of gameplay. I've seen my Ally get down to about an hour to an hour and a half for some of these games, so that kind of seems roughly in line with where we're expecting it to be. To get Armored Core Fires of Rubicon to play at 60 FPS, I had to bump the TDP up to 28 watts. I had to set the graphics settings down to 720p medium, but I only saw 50 minutes of battery life. If you're looking to play big AAA titles like Armored Core on a device like this, you definitely can do it, but you're going to want to stay near that power outlet. If you're taking it with you on the go, I definitely recommend a power bank if these are the kind of games that you want to play. It's still pretty cool to see these kind of games run. I definitely couldn't play this on the Steam Deck, and I was seeing roughly anywhere from 25 to 35 FPS. Stray also ran way better on the Loki Max compared to the Steam Deck, so that was really nice to see as well. I was going to show Control running on both of these just to give you a fair comparison to see the graphics differences between the two. I can't get this started today for some reason on the Steam Deck. I've tried a couple different compatibility modes, and I've also tried verifying the game cache, and I just can't get it to start. The game starts on the Steam Deck, but it just goes to a black screen after loading, so I'm not sure why, but it was working the other day. On the same settings though on the Steam Deck as I had on the Loki Max though, the Loki Max is pushing anywhere from about 53 to 54 FPS. There's definitely a jump in graphical performance moving to the Loki Max. This is also with the Loki Max at 15 watts, matching the Steam Deck's TDP. I wanted to get as close as I could between these two, and that was the best game to show it off. I can't get Control started on the Steam Deck now, so unfortunately that's not something that I can show. I did try starting it in DirectX 11 as well, and most of the game would load. After the cutscenes at the beginning, it would just go to a black screen, so I really can't show anything off with the Steam Deck. I think this is another feature of having a Windows-based handheld. It's just better compatibility. I've had more issues on SteamOS than I have on Windows, but I'm more used to Windows in general, so this is not going to be for everyone. I do think that there is a lot of value to be had on the Loki Max. If you're looking for a good system, something that's well built with good components, you get a good screen on here. I think for me anyways, this is an excellent system, but the only drawback to using a console like this or an X86 handheld in general is the battery life. In general, when I'm using these, I kind of treat them as a single sitting device. So if I have a break or I'm at my lunch and I want something to do, you can pull this out, play it for an hour or whatever. Then when you're done, you definitely want to put it back on to charge. If you treat this as a single sitting device, you aren't going to be bothered by the battery life. I think the real selling point of a device like the Loki Max is its portability and power. You're getting a device that's faster than the Steam Deck, you're getting something that has good compatibility, and you have excellent portability. This is so much smaller than the Steam Deck, it's hilarious, and putting these two side by side really shows the difference. In terms of portability, I would rate the Loki devices on par with the Neo Air. Both of these devices are excellent, but you do get these full-size joysticks, and their ergonomics are better on the Loki itself. I do think that these two devices are the portability champions in terms of x86 gaming, and you can't go wrong with the Loki Max. I've been using both of these devices for a while now, and I do find myself picking up the Loki devices 9 out of 10 times. The only time that I would pick up the Air is if this device was out of battery and I didn't have my Ally handy. The good thing about the x86 arena is that it's always changing. I do think that you'll be extremely happy with the Loki Max or the Loki Zero, depending on what you're looking at. I think the closest competitor to the Loki Max is the Steam Deck. But if the Steam Deck is too big for you, then I think you'll be very happy with the Loki Max. Just remember, this is a Windows device. A lot of the quirks that you're going to have on Windows do make it over to this device because of that. You can also run the Loki on SteamOS using Chimera OS. This does help the battery life of the device a little bit. Do you have a Steam Deck right now and wish you had something smaller? If you've had a Loki Max before, what do you think about it? Is the battery life good enough for you for what you were playing on it? Let me know in the comments below. Unfortunately, this video ran a little long, so I wasn't able to cover emulation, but the Loki Max is going to be able to do anything, and Russ also did cover some emulation performance on this device. If you're interested in checking out emulation on the Loki Max, make sure to check out Russ's video. I can always cover emulation on the Loki Max down the road if you guys are interested as well. As always, there'll be links in the description to this device if you're interested in picking it up. I've been loving the Loki Max so far, and I think it's a great console. If you have any questions about the Loki Max, make sure to let me know in the comments below. I do try to look at all the comments and try to answer as many questions as possible. So if you have a question, make sure to ask. To AYN, I think you guys made an incredible device. I just wish it was out a little sooner. The 6800U is an excellent processor, but it is a little outdated. I still think for $550 US though, it does offer excellent value. With a little performance tuning on this device and a couple of option tweaks, you can get some pretty decent performance. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe. We're getting really close to 5,000 subs, and I think that's really awesome to see. You guys make this channel possible, and I can't thank you enough for subscribing. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone in the next video, and as always, thanks for watching.